We will try to speak very slowly.
That's better. Yeah.
All right. That's great. We're happy. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming to this panel called All Eyes on Me. I'm Rafael Zanata. I'm the director of Data Privacy Brazil Research Association, which is an NGO based in São Paulo. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to research for fundamental rights and the rise of data protection as an autonomous fundamental right and the many connections with the data protection with other fields. And here we have also Helena Secaf from Data Privacy Brazil. She's a researcher involved in this project, which we'll briefly explain. And Eduardo, my old friend from TEDIC. He's the co-director of TEDIC, an organization based in Asunción. Virtually, we have Ksenia Bakina, lawyer and coordinator of project at Privacy International, a very well-known organization based in London. And also Eduardo, another Eduardo and another friend from Buenos Aires, which does an amazing work at the Asociación por los Derechos Civiles, ADC, also very well-established and recognized NGO for digital rights. The context of this discussion here is an ongoing investigation which is being conducted by Data Privacy Brazil and TEDIC with the support of Privacy International, which has been occurring for more than a year right now, about the datafication of border surveillance and the lack of transparency and opacity that we do have in those big projects. They are not well known in academia. They are not well known by citizens. They are really opaque. They're complex to understand because they involve issues of public security, of integration of different databases, of the use of technology in a highly problematic area. As we know in Brazil, the border of Brazil is huge, and many cities that are located in the border are also very violent cities, cities in which we have drug dealing, traffic of human beings, many kind of crimes and violence, which sometimes are not the same kind of reality that we might face in other cities like São Paulo and Rio and others. So it is a complex scenario. It's a complex social scenario. And there's also an increased complexity regarding this big effort of making public security and intelligence and the use of technology at the same time. So one of the puzzles of this research is, first of all, to understand the institutional architecture of how these occur and make it visible to citizens. That's why one of the reports that was published some months ago was about making the COF, which is the Center for Integrated Operations, visible to citizens, which is quite interesting because it is a partnership between Brazil and Paraguay. That's why we are together, an NGO based in Asunción and the other in São Paulo, to understand that and research that in this kind of a binational approach. Right now, the project is moving towards understanding the use of drones, and more specifically one project called Muralha Digital in Brazil, to not only talk about the problems of transparency and how it happens, how is the institutional architecture, but what is the deal in terms of fundamental rights? The question would be, all right, but so what? What are the risks and why this might be problematic when we're talking about human rights and fundamental rights? So it's another level of the project in which it is more focused not only in the description of the architecture of these systems, but also making a more clear argument about what kind of fundamental rights might be impacted. Are we talking about chilling effects in terms of border movement? Are we talking about new capabilities of detecting someone as a target when we have these integrated databases? Are we talking about the possibility of data breaches and data leaks and any kind of other risks when you have this kind of integration? So many questions that are together, which are concerning us, in which we thought that it would be a good idea to open up the discussion, even if it is a preliminary and ongoing investigation with all of you. That's why we're very happy to be here with you, and we truly welcome your questions, your participation, and your commentaries, which will also benefit us, considering that this is an ongoing project. So I will start asking Ksenia to provide her remarks, and having the possibility of doing research on many jurisdictions, also provide the narrative in which Privacy International is well suited to give on the problems of use of drones, human rights violations, and the increased investments in border surveillance. So I thank you, Ksenia, and I'll give the floor to you. All right. Thank you so much, Xenia. Thank you so much for this broad and really good overview of the approaches. Also reminds with one theoretical debate that we do have in the field of data protection, which is about a right to reasonable inferences based on metadata or data collected from social networks. There is indeed a very nice paper by Sandra Watcher and Brent Mittelstadt, two scholars from Oxford University, about this, which is an amazing paper I truly recommend for everyone, because it connects with this problem of what could be reasonable in terms of inferences, as your example about the bros was very, very good. So I will give the floor to Eduardo Ferreira, our partner from ADC, for your explanation. And thank you for joining us, Eduardo. right, thank you, Eduardo. Thank you. I think it is also really, really useful, the experience and the challenges of researching those suppliers. I think this point is very important for us as well. What we are understanding here in Brazil is that big companies, they do not operate directly in public procurements. They operate through local suppliers. So, for instance, Celebrite operates through a company called TechBiz in Brazil. Other big techs like Maltego, who offers softwares for public security, also join some public procurements through local suppliers. So this is also very important for researchers. Try to use different methodologies, as explained, by looking through public statements, many other sources, to build a map of which are those local suppliers, because they do not operate directly. And I think this is a super helpful point for this kind of research that we're doing. So I will pass to Elena, who is a researcher who is leading this work at Data Privacy, also conducting many interviews with former secretariats of public security in some states to share some of the experiences and what we've been learning so far.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, everyone. What I have prepared a little bit for this presentation is to talk about the study that we have conducted together, so TDIC and Data Privacy, as Rafael mentioned, about the center, the integrated center. But I will not sum up all of the findings. I think it's important for you to read the report. It's really good. But what I would like to say here a little bit is just to contextualize, right? The center, it is a center of security. It is a specific program of security in Brazil, and it is located in the triple border. And it aims to fight cross-border crimes in a way that is inspired by the U.S. fusion centers. And fusion centers are the centers that were created after the 9/11 attacks. And the logic of the center is that they combine information from different agencies, they centralize informations, they produce reports, and then they disseminate it to the agencies again. And CIOFI follows this logic. So it has the goal to produce intelligence, centralize information, exchange, and it is coordinated by CEOP, which is a body from the Brazilian intelligence, and it counts with organs such as the federal police or the highway police and the civil police from Paraná, for example. And so all of these organs, they share data and information, and they centralize it under one roof, which is CIOFI, right? And the center was announced in 2019. It began its operations in the beginning of 2020, and when we started our research in 2021, there was still very little information about how it was developed, how it worked, which actors were involved, which data collected, and so on. And so this integration, this strategy of centralizing databases, combined with this opaqueness of how it worked, caught our attention. And this is to say that CIOFI is not an isolated effort that employs technology to fight cross-border crimes, right? So it's part of a bigger trend. And in this sense, the main goal of our study was to, as Rafael mentioned, to shed a light in this program, understanding better what it is, how it worked, and so on. And Data Privacy was responsible for the Brazilian point of view, and TDIC for the Paraguayan point of view, and then in the end, our aim was to connect the dots and collect the information to see if we could form a bigger picture of the center. And we used three sources for gathering information: documentary reviews, interviews with people that were related to the center, and FOIA's requests. And I'm saying this because it's worth mentioning from the beginning that even with all these sources, our final report still has some gaps on how the center works. And I'm sure it's not because we did a good job, but it's because it's really hard to find information on it. So this reveals an important thing that was already mentioned by the other panelists, which is the lack of transparency regarding how the center works. And I would like to highlight two main points that caught my attention during and after the research, which are points that revolve around an issue of narrative. So the first point is this narrative of efficiency that revolves around the trend of integration and datafication of public security. And the second one is the challenge that we have for creating a counter-narrative in order to show that these are issues, that there are issues in this lack of transparency in all the centers, without, like at the same time, without diminishing the importance of public security. So moving on to this first point about the idea of efficiency that sustains this integration trend, I would like to highlight that just as Eduardo had mentioned, the documents that we find in our research were very emphatic about the positive outcomes, highlighting that the center had succeeded in arrests and capturing people, but there was not much information about the center. And also, the interviewees, at least the Brazilian ones, they were very enthusiastic of this idea, like integrating data, and it was this big buzz around everything that this datafication of public security, like it is necessary for the future of public security to work. And we found out that, unlike the fusion centers that we looked into a little bit, CIOFI has no privacy policy document. And it also has no administrative act that regulates the collection and processing of data. So what I'm trying to say here is that together with this narrative of efficiency, there is this lack of regulation, and this lack of regulation is not the only disregard for formalities that we have seen throughout the research. In fact, one of the interviewees, when we were asking about sharing of information with other authorities and how that worked, highlighted that sometimes it is important to have a relationship with other authorities from other countries, but that these relations sometimes they are informal because, and I quote, because sometimes excessive formalism can stifle the center's efficiency. So all this agitation and excitement around efficiency, the idea of creating a pool of information that will help everything be better and faster, sometimes it stays in the way of the process of formality, and it is as if efficiency came first, like it was a greater goal, and then everything that stands in the way of efficiency should be taken out of the way, like due process, formality, data protection rights, and so on. And this lack of formality goes hand in hand with the lack of transparency in the center. So even though we have studied very deeply, we still don't know, for instance, which data is collected, which algorithm is used, which people have data collected, and the period in which the data stays in the center. So things that are very crucial for us to understand how the program works, right? And this leads into the second point, which is the difficulties that we have, the challenge that we have for creating a counter-narrative. And this narrative of efficiency, although it is flawed and right, is a very powerful narrative, right? So if people believe it, it parallels with common sense, the idea, for instance, of I have nothing to hide. Like if you have nothing to hide, why are you against the collection of data? Right? There's this common thinking. And what I'm saying is that as an attempt to contribute to the question of what can we do as civil society, I believe that helping create this counter-narrative is one of the most important things that we should try to do, because it is hard. And so we know that this datafication raises serious risks of fundamental rights violation, but how can we translate this worry for civil society in general? And I thought about this, I'm thinking about this, because, for instance, I gave the report to my parents to read, and they are in the field of data protection. And I read it, and they said, okay, but isn't it good that the police are equipping themselves, and cross-border violence is very serious? So what I'm saying is, I think we should be very careful not to put ourselves in a position that seems to be against public security. It's like we have the duty to create this narrative that we are on the same side of public security. There is no
trade-off between privacy and security. This is not a solution per se. It's not sufficient alone, but it's something that I think that we should always think about when we are publishing and disseminating content in this field, right? And just to finalize some possible guiding lines that we thought about when talking to some experts in the field during the project is to present, for instance, concrete cases of violations, which is unfortunate, but it's something that we can use to show that this is something that is very bad. And also, one idea is like, is it to question the narrative of efficiency? Like, is this really efficient? Does it help to maintain and promote public security? Just like Zana's example of the costs of translation, for instance. This costs money. Is this really efficient, right? So, and lastly, maybe we can challenge the concept of security. Like, are we really secure when we don't know how the security apparatus operates, and things like that. So, these are all things that I would like to say about the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're very cautious as well how to present ourselves to the Secretariat of Public Security, because one could ask, are you one of those human rights guy? And we say, no, we're here to do research on how to improve public security. And they were like, all right, that's great, so let's talk. So we need to be cautious on how we talk to them and to be on the same page, as Elena said, because otherwise we can be pushed to the other side. Like, you guys are against it, so we'll not talk to you. So Eduardo, very happy you're here. Good to see you, my friend, and I'll give it to you.
Sorry for the clapping, I got excited. So thank you very much also for inviting us. It's been an ongoing research, and it's indeed an ongoing research that we're quite passionate about, especially because we're also quite interested in the trends in the triple border area, which is an area shared by Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, because normally once technology is implemented there, it tends to escalate to other border cities, which is one of the findings of the research, which I also very much encourage to read. I'm going to try to be as brief and slow as possible, but at the same time, I'm cognizant about the time, so I would love to have some time to maybe exchange points and feedback from you guys as well. So maybe for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eduardo, and I work at TDIC, which is a very similar organization as Data Privacy, but we're based in Paraguay, so we're a digital rights organization, and we pretty much conduct research around privacy, human rights in general, and its implication on the internet, and how we can extend those rights to the internet as well. So the research in the CF is part of this integral effort that we do towards an advocacy, an evidence-based advocacy, and also an advocacy and evidence-based policy making. So I won't spend any extra time talking about CF because I think Elena has done that beautifully. But perhaps, and to contextualize things on the Paraguayan side, I think it's important to talk about that we're in a difficult security context right now, where we have situations that we have not seen that bluntly in the past, as we're seeing now, which is the effects of drug trafficking that have reached a peak that is translated in shootings in public spaces, also undeniable connections with politicians and influencing institutions. And this, of course, translates into a very palpable feeling of insecurity. And I shared this at the beginning of this intervention because as civil society, I think that I want to replicate what Elena has said. We have to be very cognizant about the context in which we are, we as privacy advocates and as digital rights organization, but it's becoming increasingly harder to address the importance of privacy without often ending up clashing with opposing discourses of certain stakeholders that perceives and pretty much advocate that there are inescapable trade-offs between security and privacy. So this is something that we need to be aware of and sort of like strategize as to how to better treat, how to better not necessarily avoid the conversations, but to find common narratives. So to continue on the CF and the research in general, I think that it was a very interesting experience for us because this binational approach sort of allowed to identify not only, let's say, accurately describe the CF as much as possible, but I was also able to find inconsistencies around declarations at both sides of the border, which allowed us to then to do hypotheses and to sort of like infer as to how the system works. So this was a very interesting experience, and I would describe some of them just to show you a bit about the situation. So to point my proof my point. That's the word. So first of all, the research definitely showcased an interest of Brazil to institutionalize and internationalize the CF. We were able to find a bunch of invitations that have been sent to Paraguayan authorities, concurrently the National Police, the Ministry of Interior, and the Senate Agency, which is the anti-drug agency. But these invitations, and this is one of the first findings, have not followed international public law due process, whereby the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should have received those invitations to sort of like evaluate and analyze potential conflicts of interests and risk of violation of international agreements that the country has ratified. Moreover, and this was one of the incongruences that we found, there are contested versions of both sides of the border in regards to membership within CF. For instance, we were able to find through the documentary review that Elena was saying that news outlets in the Brazilian side do point to existing cooperation agreements between Paraguay and also Bolivia, Colombia, and Peru, but the research from our end and both the interviews and the different FOIA requests that we did do not point to those international cooperation agreements. So where are they? Do they exist? Do they not exist? We would say that at this point it's still safe to say that there is no representation of Paraguayan authorities within CF, but still this sort of like contested narratives at both sides of the border is problematic, and it sort of like doesn't help to create a trust environment towards the policy. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that there are some links to institutions that, although there is no proof of potential invitations sent to Paraguayan institutions, such as the public ministry, it would seem that there is some sort of exchange of information between CIOF and this particular institution. It was impossible to fully confirm nor deny the existence of a direct invitation, but through the documentary review, we were also able to find that the public ministry was publicly stating that they had cooperation exchanges with CIOF, and after FOIA requests that we did pointing to that particular news that the very public ministry published, a response arrived pointing, and here I will quote as well, like Elena did, that CIOF is a cooperation-oriented agency for the exchange of strategic information without the need of a formal invitation or request for cooperation through formal channels. And this response also pointed out to spontaneous exchange of information to optimize tasks and fight against transnational crime. So here again, this narrative of efficiency, this narrative of optimization comes up again, and it connects very well with some of the interviews that the Brazilian side did, where they obviously, it would seem that this spontaneity, this efficiency is somewhat of a common perception among the security and law enforcement field, with, of course, an obvious disregard to potential scenarios of abuse when thinking in human rights in general. And also, one of the most interesting findings, I would say, of the research is the international cooperation aspect. And this was something very interesting because at both sides of the borders, we found different findings. Let's say, as Elena was saying, and talking about the U.S. involvement in terms of like advocating for a center of this sort, we also found interested in the Paraguayan side from the European Union. Basically, the Eurofront, the European Union funds international cooperation programs such as the Eurofront program, which is a program whose goal is to encourage exchange of information between border management officials and institutions, and to sort of like establish permanent dialogue between them. So currently there are two security programs called El Pacto and Eurofront, which are funded by the European Union. And it would seem that the final goal of these programs is to better equate how data from the triple border area and from the European Union in border areas are collected. And it's very important to see this trend, sort of like analyze the establishing of the COF as a broader trend that comes from outside of our countries and is in a way advocated and or imposed by different countries. And connect also with what Xenia was saying, you know, how technology is being used in different ways and how those technologies tend to be exported then to our regions without necessarily also exporting some of the safeguards that other countries have. Like, for instance, in the case of Paraguay, we don't have a national data protection law. So we don't have independent institutions that can help navigate other institutions to better analyze the risks and the potential implications, the negative implications of human rights when talking about this sort of policies, which also I connect with something that Xenia was saying, that the ICO, which is the Information Commissioner Officer, or I don't remember what the acronym, but it's the Data Protection Agency, sort of like talks about the risk of too much data being collected by law enforcement. So it's a good example, I would say, as to why data protection is important and it needs to be institutionalized in our countries. Just to wrap up, I would say, because I am within time, I think that now, and I would love to hear some feedback about the people who are hearing this, we need to further bring together discussions of privacy and the privacy and the security way in the security field in a way that is proactive and meaningful, to actually identify the commonalities and connections between the fields that can ensure a rights respecting or the enforcement of rights respecting policies. So thank you very much for this, and eager to hear feedback about the research. Thank you, Rafa.
Thank you.
All right. Officially, we had 5 minutes, but I'll ask your patience to be just a couple of minutes more. I will stand up and ask you to raise your hand if you want to make a comment, share your experience, or make a question. We do not need to be necessarily focused on questions. So if you want to share any kind of experience or something you thought about might be relevant, would be great for us. So please don't be shy, and I'll hand to you. Okay.
Congratulations, you all. It's very interesting panel. It's more a curiosity. I'm very interested in reading the research you talk about. Is it published somewhere? Can you share with us? All right.
And Lucas. Let's try this one. Yeah.
I'd like to ask to Elena too, and I think it's very interesting. I'm anxious to read your report, and I was thinking. I have a legal question. I was thinking about LGPD and the exception, because LGPD does not apply to public security context. And I was thinking, if you have heard anything, any arguments saying that data protection is not a problem here because LGPD does not apply, or at least does not apply entirely. I'm asking that because I've heard this in different contexts, and if you didn't heard this, what's your opinion on that? How can we deal with data protection in public security contexts, in a legal context where the law does not apply or does not apply entirely, or at least it's not clear what's the law that regulates this kind of issues? You mentioned that the center does not have a privacy policy, and how can we ask then, you need to respect data protection law, but at the same time the law says that it not applies in that context.
Okay, so a very hard question. But what I can say is that during the interviews that we conducted in the research, as Rafael mentioned, we tried not to say like we are for human rights and things like that. So we kind of let them talk. And in this sense, data protection did not appear as a subject whatsoever. So data protection, privacy did not seem to be a concern. So I think we were a step behind of saying like data protection does not apply here. We were in a stage where it didn't seem to matter anyhow. So this is something. And about how to say that they have to have a privacy document or something like this, I think, as you said, like LGPD does not apply, but it does not apply entirely, right? So the principles, they apply, and the logic behind it applies. And now, like, data protection is a fundamental right. So I think there are ways that we can not ask for it, but demand a privacy policy or an administrative act that regulates this, because it is a fundamental right. So I think it's something in this way I would answer.
Hi. My name is Joan Lopez. I work with Global Data Justice at Tilburg University, and we have been interested in something different from data protection, and is the dependencies that these kind of contractors generate in the public security, in the public migration administration. So I'm interested in how embedded are these tech companies in the security realm in this case? How's this relationship between tech contractors and public officials? And I think it's also a question for ADC and for Eduardo. It would be interesting to hear a little bit more about this relationship and how embedded their logics are, and how interconnected you can see this between tech companies and public officials. And the other thing is that I'm quite interested in this cooperation between the European Union and the authorities in Paraguay and Brazil. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the relationship between these cooperation agencies and how profound is this relationship in terms of imposing or creating dependencies or imposing things into public officials. So that would be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, fantastic. And Global Data Justice is such an amazing project. We like it very much. Eduardo had seen it. Could you hear it well? And I think it was directed to you as well, Eduardo. If you could explain the embeddedness of private firms and those contracts and the complex relationship that you envisioned.
I'm not sure if I understand the question well. I mean, it has to do with the relationship with privacy forums,
of how private firms operate, make connections with politicians, make those contracts. They can influence the public debate, how they are entrenched, and what you learned from that.
Yeah, well, there is 2 points. I mean, safety is a very complex area in Argentina, and it's one of the main worries in the society. And despite the fact that criminal numbers are not as high as in other countries of Latin America, so it's not a push government to find any solution to get more public support, and that's when it enters into technology. Usable way for government to see, okay, we are doing something, and this has led to many private companies to get into contact in Argentina, and other factors have to do with trade relations between Argentina and other countries. For instance, usually when it was done in China, for instance, Argentina has a lot of commercial relationship with China, issues like mining, recreation. These agreements are usually the way for companies from China to put surveillance. I would say that, but I think that one point in my country that has to be highlighted, I'm not sure if this is particularly belongs to Argentina or it's in another situation, is that this implementation of surveillance technology in Argentina started from the ID card, the ID card, because we have the biometric database containing the information from every citizen, and this particular database that was only to provide ID services.
To go to the international cooperation, the cooperation is currently fluent and very much live between the European Union and at least the triple border area at the three sides of the border. So Eurofront and El Pacto are both security and migration programs that are being funded by the European Union. They have publicly available information as to what is the scope of it. They have a very particular focus in training on technology and including technology in migration and border management in general. So that is a big avenue of research that could be further explored. And what we were able also to note is that, at least from the interviews that we did, is that Paraguay is the one that is more advanced from the three sides in terms of the dialogue with the region, but definitely it's an ongoing process also in Brazil and in Argentina. And what was also curious is that there was no information pointing to Eurofront from the documentary review in the Brazilian side. So it's like different conversations are happening in different spaces, and the very people who are involved in executing these sort of policies don't really even know about the existence of the programs. So this is also very curious. And it takes me also to the incongruencies that I was mentioning. So like different statements as to how the CEOF as a center works at both sides of the border show like a complete lack of knowledge from the very people that is enforcing the policy. So it is worrying because they are the ones that should also evaluate if they are dangerous when implementing the policy in the first place. But yeah, the European Union is the one that we were able to at least point more directly as to very much pushing for implementing integrated centers such as CEOF. And to the imposed question, I think it's a delicate question. I mean, in general, we are talking about very defunded ministries in our regions. So whenever international cooperation comes with the possibility of renew or like modernize a certain situation or a certain public ministry or a given policy, they tend to accept everything because they are very much defunded and they also need the resources. So there's like different problems converging into one point that needs to be analyzed.
Just one quick comment. By doing this dual approach of investigating in Brazil and Paraguay, we identified some new things. For instance, when we were doing the interviews with the Brazilian authorities and public secretariats, they mentioned some visits to Texas. They went to Texas in 2016 to visit the fusion centers. They went in 2019. There was a lot of lobby by those fusion centers and some tech companies to, open these markets. But then we went doing the research in Paraguay. We discovered many issues about the Eurofront program that were not revealed by the freedom of information request in Brazil. So it was really important to contrast and to build up this knowledge. There was another question. Yeah. Okay.
Hi. First, I just wanted to say congratulations to everyone on the panel and all of the work that you've done. I'm such a fan of all of the organizations participating today. I'm Hannah Draper. I was an international digital rights funder for almost a decade and now working as a consultant and strategist. I had a question. Actually, this is something I've chatted a little bit about with PI folks in London over drinks in the past, but regarding the European context and with some others, digital rights groups working in Europe as well. And I'm wondering whether, in addition to regulatory approaches, do you see any opportunity for strategic litigation to protect the fundamental rights of privacy, but also due process? I think in Europe, I'm sorry, and I'm speaking in particular about in the context of migrants. To the best of my knowledge, that work in Europe hasn't really taken off, but I was wondering with the inter-American framework if that could be a possibility to explore, or if it's something people are already working on and I'm just naive. Thank you again.
So let me get a final question, and then I'll ask Xenia to answer, considering that we'll need to conclude. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jesus. I come from Mexico, and I want to know how can we deal with these topics when they fall on national security as a limit for privacy, for data protection, and even transparency or access for information. As you have told us, there is lack of information available on these topics. How can we deal even the research of the topics when we cannot find information?
Thank you, Jesus. It's a great and really tough question. So I'll ask Xenia and Eduardo if you want to answer. Hannah Draper made a question more specifically for you, Xenia, on litigation and the work of PI. So maybe we can start from that and then pass to Eduardo, and we'll make a final round here to conclude the panel. All right. So Hannah, just to rephrase, also opportunities for international law and inter-American. What kind of framework on human rights, Hannah? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I think a lot of the time we look to Europe for the moral authority, and I don't think that that makes sense a lot of the time. And I think that a lot of people working in this space from, the minority world, the first world, really look to Europe, for example. But if that is maybe stalled, I'm wondering if there are opportunities to protect due process rights, privacy rights, which, all are human rights. All humans are meant to have them. But when you're a migrant, it's very difficult to exercise those rights. And I feel from my perspective, so this is, I guess, my question is, are there opportunities to use, for example, the Inter-American Human Rights Framework to advance like a strategic litigation, or is anybody thinking about that, is basically my question, because I've found often there are opportunities in the Americas that could actually have international benefits.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Okay, so Xenia and Eduardo, I'll give it to you.
I had a bit of problem reading all the questions. So I'm not sure how well equipped I will be to answer them. In terms of just a couple of points in terms of the specific litigation and what we see. FBI, we represented a very unfortunately. So we can support litigation for migrants. Is what we've done with the case of our third extraction, but we don't defend regions per se. However, part of the reason why we deal with our tech research is that we can train them in civil society, their lawyers, that do represent individuals and can pursue these rights in examples today are quite extensive. But when it comes to migrants, their rights are often disregarded even more. So I don't think that's why the inter-American human rights treaty approach a question, but I'm not sure if I know that much about how it is introduced because we don't represent the representation outright. But yeah, it's just follow up questions that we see and solve the community.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much. Eduardo, how to deal with the national security argument? That was the point made by Jesus for your final comments.
Yeah. First, just a disclaimer, MyData is really low, and I don't have my charger.
All right, thank you. So give it to Eduardo and then Elena.
I think in relation to all questions or like as a general thought?
Could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that to Hannah's point, the issue of the Inter-American Court is an interesting opportunity, but of course, being cognizant of how costly and how long those processes take, maybe it's not the best avenue for, I would say, immediate results, but it is indeed an interesting avenue to explore. We have been exploring this interdict through strategic litigation as well there. So I would say it's a worthy avenue. And to Jesus' point, I think that one of the learnings from our research, at least, was that even though, for instance, we weren't able to gather that much information from the FOIAs, and we did actually get a lot of information from the documentary review, but the FOIAs were very vague. But the issue of granting anonymity to interviewees, like from a practical standpoint at least, was very useful. Like those were pretty much the main data collection sources that we had to connect the missing dots. And you have to, of course, create an environment of trust with your interviewees, but it is indeed also an interesting learning experience that we have. Like by granting this anonymity, you definitely access more information through those interviews.
All right. Great, thanks.
Okay, so just a final remark. I don't have the answer to how to solve this problem, but something that I think it's useful as well, not only this counter narrative for society in general, but also to present ourselves, NGOs and civil society representatives, as a open channel for the government to speak. So like this non-combative language, this something just to, if they have doubts, they can come talk to us and we can help, right? This idea of helping. So I think this is something I would like to say as a final remark, and thank you, everyone.
Okay. So I'd like to thank Xenia and Eduardo from connecting from Buenos Aires in London. Thank you so much. Thanks, Eduardo, Elena. Thanks, Eduardo Matos and all the staff of FGV for all your support in this conference. And thank you all for the presence, the members of the Brazilian Bar Association and many other friends. It was a great discussion. We're truly honored with your presence here, and have a good day. Thank you.